Have you ever tried to memorize a page of the Quran, repeat it many times, but then forget it a week later? You might think you have bad memory, but according to researchers who study learning and memory science, memory is definitely not the problem. The problem rather is your method. In this video, I want to show you 4 principles of memory science that can help you in your hifz retention. The reason this matters is because many people think hifz is about willpower and talent. They think some people have amazing memories and others don't. But the more I studied memory science and the more I reflected on my hifz journey, the more I realized that memory is nothing more than a skill that is developed. And like any skill, there are methods that work and there are methods that don't work. Imagine 2 students. Student A rushes to memorize 1 page every day and doesn't review properly, and student B memorizes half a page a day and memorizes it well and reviews constantly. After a year, student A would have memorized less pages than student B because student A would have to re-memorize the pages he rushed through, and student B can keep progressing because he memorized it very well the first time. So we're going to relate these 4 principles to common mistakes that Hufaz make. So here are the 4 principles as to why you're probably memorizing the Quran incorrectly. Number 1, you don't interrupt the process of forgetting because you don't constantly review. After you memorize something, there's a process of forgetting that starts as time goes by. So you want to try and interrupt that process by briefly reviewing the portion you just memorized. For example, if you memorized half a page of the Quran in the morning, then after 3 hours, you should review it again by reading it a few times. This brief review can be delayed until tomorrow, but no later than that. Otherwise, days will go by and you will start to forget what you previously memorized. I used to apply this myself by reviewing the page I memorized after about 5 hours, and I would also practice it in Salah. And most of the time, I would review it the next day before my next memorization session, and I would start by reviewing from the beginning of the surah. And if I did not do this throughout my hifz journey, I would have never been able to master a single surah, let alone move on to the next one. And that brings us to our second common mistake, which is that you are not testing yourself because you are only reviewing by looking at the Musaf. If you do not test yourself in your hifz, it will be very hard to retain what you memorized and recite it from memory. That is because learning is only meaningful when an effort has to be made. So you have 2 paths you can take. Number 1, you can make all your revision without looking. Number 2, you can make your revision by looking at the Mus'haf, in addition to testing yourself often by reading to a friend or to a sheikh. So whether you prefer reciting by looking or without looking, you'll always need to actively test yourself so you can maintain the habit of reciting from memory. And this is based on the fact that many researchers who study memory science explain that active recall is essential to master any subject matter, as opposed to simply rereading the material many times. From the start of my hifz, I always used to revise without looking at the mushaf. I prefer it this way because for me, I have a problem with focusing, so reading without looking forces me to focus and actively recall. But if you personally prefer to review by looking at the mushaf, then that is no problem because many hufaz do it that way. But if you choose to revise by looking at the Mus'haf, you have to make sure that you actively test yourself either by reading to a friend or by testing yourself in Salah. The third common mistake is that you are cramming through memorization, which is not giving your brain enough time to process what you memorize. Memorizing fast is one of the worst things you can do as an aspiring hafiz. There's absolutely no benefit in rushing through memorization because at the end of the day, you need to actually memorize it and not just be familiar with it. Many researchers agree that spaced practice helps the information settle in your long-term memory. Ever since I started my hifz, I saw so many people forget the Quran because they used to rush through their memorization. Seeing that scared me so much to the point where when I used to memorize, I would do many repetitions no matter how boring it was. You may think that you can rush through memorization and make up for it by reviewing it afterwards, but trust me, the stronger you make it the first time, the less you will regret later on. I noticed that the passages that I did not memorize well, to this day I struggle with them in my review. So a practical step you can take is that you should determine what you are able to consistently memorize. If you find yourself able to memorize, let's say, half a page every day, and you're truly able to do that every single day without fail, then stick to that and don't increase it anymore. And do not overestimate yourself by thinking you can memorize 1 page a day right away. You have to start by memorizing half a page and then doing that for a month and then slowly work your way up to memorizing one page a day. So if you want to save your time, don't rely on revision to fix your weak hifz. Memorize it well the first time. The fourth and final mistake you may be falling into is that you mistake familiarity for mastery. You may find yourself in a situation where you memorize a page of the Quran, you feel like you know it very well, you've convinced yourself that you memorized it, then you close the Mus'haf to test yourself, and suddenly you can't even recite it without getting stuck many times. This means that you've become familiar with the page, but you haven't mastered it in terms of memorization. This ultimately goes back to more repetitions. You need to repeat more and more with focus until you've mastered the page. If you want to be able to tell whether you've mastered the page or not, you should be able to recite the entire page from memory without making major mistakes. Some mistakes are not something to worry about because when I would recite to my teacher, I would sometimes make one or two mistakes here and there, but no more than that. The point is that you need to master the page and not just be familiar with it. And sometimes memorization of a page can be extended across more than one day because you may find yourself in a situation where sometimes you just cannot memorize the page because of its difficulty or because you just don't feel very focused that day. All you have to do the next day is repeat it a few more times, and then since you're already familiar with it, it will now be easy to master the page. Looking back, one of the biggest lessons I learned from Hifz is that it's not about talent, rather, it's about following the process. If you avoid these four mistakes by reviewing the previous pages you memorized, testing yourself, not rushing through memorization, and mastering the page you memorize, you will definitely memorize the Quran with Allah's permission. That's it for this video. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik.